cause I can do it my way. Me making music's like shooting hoops in the driveway.
Okay, welcome to Mastered with Mike, the podcast where we explore how people master what moves them. Today's conversation starts with real leadership, where real leadership begins, not with titles, but with time spent inside schools, working directly with students, families, and teachers. I'm joined by Noreen Leahy and Patrice Dobies, two deeply respected leaders in special education who didn't just study the system, they led it. Noreen served as the head of special education in Rockville Center, where she oversaw complex systems, compliance, and student supports, as well as using my platform, Datability. Patrice was the head of special education in East Meadow. In addition to her district leadership, she served as the president of Lycea, supporting and advocating for special education administrators across Long Island. Today, they work together at North Star Education. Is it consulting or education?
North Star Education Consulting.
North Star Education Consulting, partnering with districts to strengthen special education systems through experience, trust, and practical insight. Okay, so Noreen and Patrice, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me today. I'm very excited to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you very much for inviting us.
Absolutely. So we'll start with before your leadership roles. Before you had roles like head of special education, both of you spent time in schools. What did you do before your leadership role? And I'll throw it out to whoever wants to answer first.
So I'll start. I had a circuitous route to education to begin with. It was my second career. My first career was as a naval officer, a seagoing naval officer, which I did on active duty and in the reserves for about 21 years. For a portion of the time that I was in the reserves, I decided to go back to school to get my degree in school counseling. So I did that. It made sense at the time because I was doing a number of presentations for the Navy, for admissions to the Naval Academy. So I started to meet these wonderful school counselors and teachers and principals and, of course, the students. And I was very intrigued with working with students at that point in their lives. So that's how I entered education. I did that for about 5 years. And because of my background, I think there was a natural tendency to want to take on a leadership role. So I became the assistant principal after 5 years. While there, I ran the special education department for the high school. And that's where I really became more intimately involved with special education. And that kind of led naturally to my position as the assistant superintendent for special education and people personnel services, which I carried out for 11 years in Rockville Center before I retired.
Wow, that's fascinating, by the way. I had no idea. Thank you for your service, by the way. That is amazing. And I have not heard that part of you, that side of you. So that's really, really cool. It's so funny. Most of the teachers I speak to, they went to college, then they went to education. What a jump, but also what a great jump, for you and for the kids. I think you probably bring a very unique point of view to the districts that you don't often see. So that's pretty amazing. I love that.
Well, my way to leadership was probably, or into education was probably much more conventional and traditional. I remember telling my father when I was 18 years old, I'm going to go to college and be a teacher. And he was like, a teacher, you're going to be unemployed. So luckily, knock on wood, I was never unemployed. I didn't have the most high paying job through my career, but I always had a job. So I went undergrad, special ed and general ed. And when I graduated, I worked in a parochial school. It was wonderful. I was 21 years old, and it was a great way to launch my career. And from there, I went to public school, and I was in the classroom teaching elementary and special education for about 15 years before I made the leap into administration. And I think it happened because I was a teacher leader. I served on the board of the negotiating for the new contract. I was a teacher center member. I was part of the executive board. And that's just kind of led me into administration. And I remember when I was in administration school, my professor telling me that, the cool thing is instead of having a classroom of 15 or so, I'm going to help more kids. And I have. So like when you're a special ed teacher or a resource room teacher, you have 20 kids on your caseload. But in the position I held as a special ed leader, I really changed the life of thousands of kids. And it was interesting because, nobody in your family knows exactly what you do. Wait, you're not a principal, but, you're not like, what do you do over there? And it was kind of when I retired, I said, you don't know. I had really, changed kids' lives and hopefully for the better through the kind of leadership that I led in the district.
It's funny you mentioned that about leading in special education and being in special education myself. I think it's just one of the most unique roles in education because, and this is not a slight against general education at all, but general education is a much more stable education. Whereas I feel like special education is forever changing, whether it's, with the legalities or curriculum. I mean, I currently now teach sixth grade ICT. I've taught alternative high school. I've taught life skills. I've taught resource room. I did a stint as a chairperson for a year. I taught AIS, and I never had the same year twice, ever, whether that was new technology in the classroom or new regulations or new science coming out on ways to work with kids with, maybe dyslexia or autism. I mean, it's a never ending, never always shifting pile of sand that it keeps you on
Sure
your
is.
yeah, it keeps you on your toes. It really does. And, if you're not in it, people don't understand it. What people see on the outside is, oh yeah, you have the summers off and you have these holidays. But I would say that, in special education, we work just as hard, if not harder than a very, very high stress financial job sometimes and the people you're responsible for are the people's children, right? Like the most tender, the most, any parent would, jump in front of a car for their children. So they're your responsibility for the day. And every day, every year, September when it rolls along, it excites me because I don't know what's going to happen that year. I might shift to second grade or I might be doing something different. And, having really good special education leaders is super important because if there's a combative feeling between staff and admin, or if it's tough, but if you are, in this together, it just makes all the difference in the world. I mean, I know I have new special education admin right now and they're fantastic and I feel supported and I can go to them with anything. And you need that, right? You need that role. So that leads me into my next question. You stepping into leadership. What surprised you and what was the hardest thing you had to do? Like, what was the heavy part of leadership? Talk about that for a little bit. I want to know, what you loved and what was hard and would you ever do it again?
Yeah. So I'll jump in. I loved it. Patrice and I talk often about it's the hardest job anyone could ever really love that passionately. And we don't just say it now that we're retired or we're not doing it anymore. I think we became very good friends because we very often leaned on each other and others like us on our consortiums to figure out the puzzles, problem solve, talk to each other late into the night, early in the morning. So we did love the job very much. And part of what we loved was the fact that, and you already said it, it changed all the time. And so it was an intellectually stimulating job. We had to be on top of the new regulations and laws. We had to figure out if we had a higher percentage of students with a particular disability coming on. We had to figure out, did we need a program in-house because of those numbers increasing? We had to figure out if we didn't have it in-house, where were the best places? We had to be researchers constantly. All of that is for anyone that values education and enjoyed going for advanced degrees themselves. That's certainly very stimulating. I think the hard part, and so anything that had to do with the leadership, that was pretty natural to me.
Mhm.
I didn't have any trouble organizing, giving orders, changing programs, and getting people to do what you needed them to do. The hard part was, stepping back from the kids directly. You weren't there mano a mano with the children, and parents. You were that once removed. So I found that a little bit difficult. And I think the second hardest thing for me is if staff did not readily accept changes, which oftentimes they could not, and we can even use the introduction of progress monitoring tools.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Um, they just sometimes they would have difficulty with the change, and that would frustrate me sometimes. I would have to step back and take a few deep breaths before, any emotions would come out. That was probably the hardest, is getting other people to share my enthusiasm.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
And to share your vision. And I would say people say, well, the kids are the hardest part. And I'm like, absolutely not. They were not. It was the adults.
Yeah.
And I don't mean parents. I'm meaning that, when you have a vision where you want our kids to be, getting people to see that vision, sometimes it was really hard. And, a little secret that I used to say is, my big fat Greek wedding where the man says, I'm the head, and the wife says, I'm the neck that turns the head. Well, I was always the neck that turns the head. And I always say I would try to lead them there so they would come to the answer. And I said, oh my gosh, that is a wonderful idea. Thank you. I didn't think of that. That is terrific. And that was how I kind of had to do it. I always had to let them think it was their idea, because if I wanted change to happen, because people don't like change. No matter what, it's really, really challenging, that change of it. But that was probably the most difficult part of the job, was trying to share what I envisioned for our children in my district, especially when it comes to LRE. Very
Yes.
tough, very tough.
So, Mike, the thing that's very joy filled about the job, though, is there are so many people that are innovative and creative in the profession. They really are. Like, even what you did, coming up with the technology you did for progress monitoring, is very inspirational. Is a person who has a good job, they're teaching. If you did not want to break a sweat and do anything else, you didn't have to. But you saw a problem, and you figured out a way to create a solution for it, which is the way I think Patrice and I both led. And when we're out consulting, we look for, right?
Right.
It's not just about the status quo.
No. And that's the beauty of the job, and, really changing. And it's changing to meet the needs of students is basically it. And kids change on a daily basis and yearly. The students have different profiles, different needs, and one size fits all is, not special education.
Well, I have to imagine, as a educational leader, your staff ranges from the brand new, educator that just got their degree and they're hungry and they're excited, to the staff that is set in their ways. They've been doing it for 25 years and it's worked for them. And so they like what they do and they don't want to shift it because it's new to them. I got to imagine it's got to be some sort of struggle to kind of meet in the middle somewhere and kind of steer the ship as it will. I know that, being on a giant ship, it takes a while to steer it. Right. So, I remember when I came from a school called Ascent. It was a small private school for kids with autism, and our director, Nancy, data first, data forward. Right. So I came to Oceanside when Oceanside was bringing all of the kids they had out of district back into district for life skills. And so I remember going from a privately funded data first school run by a psychiatrist, actually, a PhD, to a public school, which was saying that they were doing the same things that these small schools did, but they weren't. I mean, they didn't at first, because it's not the same thing as being in a private school. Through years, the ship eventually turned, and we are definitely doing the same thing that Ascent was doing, but it took a while, especially since, I remember back when I first started, I don't want to say that the kids were, they were the kids they were bringing back, and the schools were focusing on the high performing children. We have to make sure that our numbers are good. And I've seen a big shift over the 22 years I've been teaching, to where special education is just as important, if not maybe sometimes more important than the general education, where, Oceanside prides themselves on having amazing programs. So that wasn't always the case. Not that it was Oceanside's fault or any district's fault. It's just that the shifting sands pushed it that way. And I know families now that have moved to Oceanside because of the programs. So that's a big kudos. But that's also, I've had, I think, 5 heads of special education in the time that I have been working there. And I love when we get somebody new, because it brings a new shift. Honestly, I really enjoy that. And I think, it's tough. It's tough to change. But when it works, and it works well, it's huge. So, Patrice, let's talk a bit about your leadership in Lycea. That's also, how did you jump into that role? What prompted you to join and then go to president?
Yeah. So what happened is I was in Mineola at the time working, and my neighbor was Jackie Harris, and she worked at Herrick's. And she sat me, I sat next to her, and she goes, "You're going to be my friend." And she was involved in Lyacea. And I remember her calling me and saying, "Congratulations, you were voted in as secretary or treasurer or something like that." And I didn't even know I was up for that position. And so what happened, I became part of the executive board. When I was in the president and in the vice president as well, it was really the time of the new IP, the statewide IP.
Hmm.
And, Noreen, I dragged Noreen and Bill Johnson to a meeting. So it was really important. But one of the things that, and to get the vision of what the people were doing were in the trenches, meaning the leadership, and really reaching out to Albany and the folks in state ed to make sure. And I think one of the things I'm really proud about my leadership is the fact that we connected with state ed. We made sure we were on the map with them, and when they had anything new to talk about or anything they wanted to roll out, that they needed to reach out to Long Island first. We were appalled when they were rolling out that new IP that they did not reach out to Long Island, where we're the most heavily litigated part of the state. They
Yeah.
weren't asking us, "What do we think?" I'm like, "We can tell you, and but we had some serious talking discussions with state ed leadership at that time. But what I'm very proud of in my role and position was making sure that when state ed office of special education was going to implement any kind of change or had any thoughts, let's call the people from Lyacea.
So I can vouch for that with Patrice. That was really a highlight of her leadership and a skill that she has to this day. She's just a people connector. But I just wanted to tell you, she glossed over the story of the new IEP. I was in my job about 15 seconds when she called and said, "Hi, I'm the president of Lycea, and I want to arrange this meeting with Bill Johnson, who was my boss and my mentor, and just an amazing district leader and known throughout the state for his leadership." And so I said, "Oh, okay, I can do that." And she came by the district, and she got all the points across that she wanted to get across to Bill. Bill was very well connected to the state. She knew who to talk to. So fast forward, what was it, Patrice? About 2 weeks maybe later,
Yeah.
we were in the Lycea conference, and
Hmm.
there's about 300 people in the room. And Patrice gets up in her leadership role and says, "Okay, we're going to talk about the new IEP." She said, "I'd like Noreen Leahy to come up and talk about the." And I'm looking around, people are saying, "Who the heck is she?" I'm literally the newest administrator in the room. Nah, and that's how we became fast friends. We knew right away, she is a leader, and at that point, me as a follower, we knew what had to be done, and we
It
got everybody else excited and interested in the changes as well.
Yeah, we made it happen, Noreen.
Mhm.
I have to imagine that dealing with state ed is not a very easy task. I remember I was for a little while a chairperson for a year. Tough job.
Mhm.
And I remember, doing state ed, watching some of their presentations, and I feel like they roll out ideas and
Oh yeah,
like
they're
they
building
level
the plan
exactly.
as they're flying it. Yes, yes.
There were a lot of
They're this middle child, we've got the federal government, we have the districts, and they're in the middle trying to create regulations from law, and, yeah, gets
And
muddy.
and and sometimes they didn't, kudos to the new leadership they have now. Chris Soriano was a director. He led a special ed department for a school district. So he has that knowledge that he's brought to the job, which I think has really helped all of us in that area.
Very approachable,
oh,
as
that's
well.
good.
Oh, and he gets it. And it's been, I think he's in that position and role. He's really been working with school districts and school leadership, and that's been valuable.
Yeah, I remember seeing some guidelines, and really, you're right. They're like building the plane as it's flying. Yes, all great ideas, but again, I feel like Long Island is definitely a unique animal when it comes to education, special education in general. It can be stressful at times. I've been in plenty of impartial hearings, and I feel like there should be training specifically on that for teachers, because the first one I was ever in, I was like, "Ooh, I did not sign up for this. This is tough." And if you're not ready for it, it can really throw you for a loop.
I think the reason they're tough is that most people that do this job only want to do the best they can for the child, for the student, right? And they want to make sure that the child gets everything they need and is challenged appropriately. And when someone's telling you that didn't happen, it's very difficult not to be very defensive.
Mhm.
But that in a way is good. I used to say when I watched teachers testify, and and be impassioned and emotional, I said that's a good thing, because they really care about their job and the kids. And I think one of the things that we've seen in the field in our consulting work, um, is one of the things we look for, I should say, is just that, is that interest in educating a child in an appropriate setting and to challenge that child,
Mhm.
right? Not look at the disability, look at the ability of that child to navigate the system and to be able to get the most they can to optimize their educational outcomes.
Yeah, that makes sense because it's funny, even now, as for the first time ever, I'm new to ICT. I was ICT in alternative high school, but I'm new to elementary ICT. And for the first time ever, really, we're doing actual report card grades. I always submitted progress reports, right? But now we're doing grades. And I'm going back and forth, not in a bad way, but in a kind of a pushing back and forth way with my gen ed teachers, saying that I want to give the student a higher grade than they think that they deserve, because these children have the scaffolds in place for a reason, right? We should be grading them on their ability when their needs are being met, um, whether we pull them away. It's a push and a pull, and we obviously came to an understanding as to where the grade should be. I always looked at it, a student, if they need that calculator or they need the speech to text or they need the text to speech, then that's what they need to produce, to level the playing field. And, we have to think about these kids as adults someday, right? We're looking at a child that is going to be an adult in life. And if they get the speech to text now and it gets them the 85, great. That's where it should be, right? And they can now go ahead as an adult. I'm sure by the time they're adults, they'll have like robot maids following them around anyway to do the work for them. But, I think that, it's really important to challenge the kids, not just pass them through, but to put them really, and every kid should be challenged. That's the whole point of school, right? To leading
And
into that, well, go ahead, Patrice. Yeah.
I was going to say it's that old adage, what's accommodations, what's modifications?
Mm-hmm.
And, they think by modifying something that they're helping the student. You're not, because they're going to take the same regions, they're taking the same tests. You're not helping them. But by providing accommodations, such as speech to text or a calculator, that's helping them. That's
Mm-hmm.
leveling the playing field.
Mm-hmm. To that end, what are your opinions on technology and education, just in general? And I know for me, when I created Datability, it really came from a place of I really, really disliked paper and pencil data. I don't like to sit down and graph. I never liked to have a data book, but I love technology. So when I was thinking about it, what happened was we just got iPads in the middle school at the time. And my TA, Margie Gilbert, I'll forever thank her for this, said like, Mike, we should I'm sure there's an app out there somewhere that, collects data for us. And I'm like, I don't know. Let's check it out. I couldn't find one. So she's like, well, why don't you just go ahead and create one? And I was like, well, I don't know how to do that. But I took a summer. Again, my wife, that was another hobby of mine where she wanted to kill me. She's like, Mike, what are we doing? Why are you learning how to code? I'm like, well, I have the summer off and I can't sit still ever. So I took a whole summer and built, eventually hired an actual coder to build it, but mapped out and built something that suited my needs. I needed constant reminders to collect the data. I needed to know the goal schedule because, as you have a caseload of 30 kids and every schedule is different. Every data collection methodology is different. I need something to remind me of this. So that's why I built that. What are your thoughts on technology and education right now?
Beyond it, for the teacher or for the student or both?
I'd say both. Yeah, both.
Yeah. Well, it definitely has its place. And in the 20 something years that I was in education, I saw a massive shift toward the use of technology, one-to-one devices, being able to do education remotely. All of that had its positive and negative implications. I would say I have some hesitation right now with technology being used in its ent- entirety, meaning
Hmm.
everything being technology. I think we have to make sure we're not losing some basic skills, be able to write, to listen, to dialogue. I have, a kind of a fear almost about um, the overuse of technology outside of school with kids, which is a whole different topic.
Hmm.
If what we are doing in schools feeds into that, then I would say use caution. If what we're doing in school just kind of complements more natural learning environments, then I'm for it. I don't think you can get away with not use technology at this point in time. It's just here to stay. I just think we have to be careful about the balance of it.
Yeah, I agree. You know what? Yeah, go ahead, Patrice. What do you think?
Absolutely. And, technology really is to accommodate and to provide that support for kids. But I think the most important thing, it doesn't take the place of a teacher. And we should never get away with that. And the in-person teacher, because there's so many things that happens between a relationship between a student and a teacher that can't be captured on a computer screen or supplemented through apps or anything like that. Yes, it definitely has a place in education and technology in the world. And I think about augmentative communication and what we've done for our most disabled students. However, it does not take the place of a teacher, and it should never be in place of a teacher.
I agree. I will tell you that I do not like the use of Chromebooks in schools. I think they're more of a hindrance than a help. First of all, in elementary school, everyone's Chromebook is always broken. Not of a class of 30 kids, 20 kids for sure. They're not charged. They're missing keys. The Wi-Fi's bad. The kids can't type. I mean, handwriting has gone down tremendously. I make my kids write, even though a lot of the stuff is on Google Classroom. It diminishes the role of organizational skills, right? When everything is on a piece of technology, you don't have to know you put things. And what we're fighting with now, and I laughed even today. It happened. One of my students was looking for an essay that they wrote, and he had 100 untitled documents in his Google in his documents, and I said, Mike, you have to put a title on it. He said, why? I'm like, because there's 100 untitled ones. I don't know which one is yours. And the use of speech to text also does not work. First of all, when you have a child that's dyslexic, their thought process is dyslexic, and what they're producing is also dyslexic. So whatever you hope to gain by giving them speech to text, you've lost. And now we have to go back and, like, if the whole paragraph is red or blue and you have to correct the whole thing, it doesn't work. One of my favorite piece of technology that I ever saw happen was the invention of Proloquo, which was the
Yes,
functional communication. That I thought was brilliant because before that, the kids had Dynavoxes that were like $1,000.
At
So
least.
no,
Yeah.
no,
beautiful.
that's cheap. If you got it for $1,000, that was cheap.
Yeah.
Probably about 5 or 6 grand.
Oh God. But Proloquo was the best piece of technology that I saw come out in 22 years. So let's move forward. What prompted both of you to retire? And then we're going to jump into your new roles. So let's talk about when you decided to get out. Pull the parachute.
I
You
think
want to go first on this one, Patrice? You could.
for me, I think it was really the COVID pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
It just that last year wore me out. And the stress of worrying about kids, stress of worrying about my staff,
Mm-hmm.
that was it. And you're like, okay, I think I'm getting tired, you
Mm-hmm.
know? You have to go into that job at, 200 warp speed. And if you're not there every day at 200, you're not going to do your job well. And I felt I was getting tired and of that. But that's how kind of led me to where I am now. But our new chapter, which, you know, in special education, we have this very narrow but deep knowledge. A lot of people don't know what Noreen and I know. And somehow, when Noreen and I were talking about it, playing pickleball or learning how to play bridge just not in our wheelhouse, not mine anyway. And so we decided to do this. And for the simple fact, really, of service to our profession that we truly love. So
Yeah,
that's
I think that love of the profession, it's very difficult to just cut it off.
Mm-hmm.
Just stop. I was trying to think. I worked for the same district for 20 out of the 21 years in education, and the I worked for a master. I work for the guru of superintendency as far as I'm concerned. I think most people would agree. He was so far ahead of his time in terms of inclusivity and not just special ed. Any demographic you could think of, he just would not tolerate it. His mantra was all means all.
Mm-hmm.
So it was pretty exciting to work. So a year before I retired, Bill Johnson retired. One of my very close friends in the district, the assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction, went on to become a superintendent. People started to go, and I realized that was happening. And the other thing that was happening is, for the first time in over a decade, I felt the winds were shifting, that people were asking us for less for their children, not more.
Really?
Yes, they were asking, and I'm talking about students with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
They were asking for us to pull back on our rigor and our challenge and our desire to, minimize special classes, maximize ICT. We had ICT AP Calc.
Wow. That's
You know,
awesome.
so we really pushed kids into, very challenging coursework. But I was started to see that, to a certain extent, get dismantled. And people ask, and I just thought, it's better I go now, when I can maybe do something else in, the next chapter, and affect change, and not become discouraged. So I went, and also the timing was right
Right.
for my family and everything else. But when we retired, we pretty much knew immediately it wasn't the end of the road. So we were really excited to start this little business that's allowed us to get into a number of districts at this point, and really just make some suggestions that might be able to affect even more people and places and things, over time.
That's great. You know what? I think that, first of all, for both of you, those are both excellent reasons for going. I will say, there's no secret that COVID was a complete S show when it came to education, and we're still seeing the ramifications now of the kids that were out of school for about 2 years, really, when it comes to between the shutdown and then coming back, and then the amount of speech issues we still see now, and the inability to read, the attention issues. What an insane blowback. So now that you decided to move on to this new role, I'm interested to find out, when you go to a new district, whether it's on Long Island or upstate New York or wherever you wind up going, what do you do first? What is your first task that you do when you get there?
Well, when we always start, I guess, at the top. We do a lot of listening. We make a list of about, well, it just depends on the size of the district, but any administrator that even remotely touches special education, we speak to. Would be, of course, the superintendent, assistant superintendents, business officials, data guy, all the principals. And we do focus groups with every PPS subgroup: psychologists, social workers, school counselors, special ed teachers, of course, speech, OTPT, and talk to them.
general ed teachers we talk to as well, general ed.
Right.
Yeah.
Representative sample of gen ed teachers. And in doing so, we find out, we kind of can triangulate this data, right? And of course, all the chair people, coordinators of special ed, anyone that touches it. And then we go to every building and we observe the programs.
And then
And
we look at their data, from NYSED. We review their IEPs. We look at their special class programs. We look at what kids are in those programs. We look at caseloads. We look at the distribution of services between buildings. Yeah, we look at their grants. How are they effectively using their grant money? Staffing, big time. Noreen, anything else? Am I missing anything?
and there's about 10 to 12 subcomponents of running a special ed department. which Patrice just mentioned a bunch of them: the staffing, budget, organizational structure, communication, um, IEP, CSE procedures, that kind of thing. And we, in listening, in interviewing, in conducting focus groups, in looking at data, and in looking at any documentation that you could think of that would be related to those things, we'll look at all that. Now, how deep we dive and how long we dive is really depending on what the district wants. Some districts want a quick turnaround, come tell us how we're doing. Some last longer and let us, go down the rabbit hole, I guess. But usually then we produce a final report that'll talk about all of these things. We're very practical in that if we see a problem, we suggest a solution
Mm-hmm.
and we give, forms and templates and links and things like that we've either used or we've seen along the way.
Like, did you develop like a proprietary process that, some secret sauce that North Star uses that other consulting firms don't? Or do you, or are you just kind of like compiling what you know from your years of experience? Do you have like a North Star document that, the big blue book that opens up and you check everything off? In my head, I picture that you have some secret sauce
We
somewhere.
do have a secret sauce for sure.
That's great.
It's also an interesting role because Patrice and I were in roles where if I'd say a new regulation came in and you had to do something within special ed, you had to make it happen. You listened, you talked, you let the teacher change all that stuff, but it had to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Did it. In consulting, even if you see a major problem, like if you start waving your hand saying, school board, superintendent, the state's going to come in, you have to do something about this right now. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't.
Right.
Interesting. What are the two things? What are the biggest issues you see for some of these districts? And then, well, answer that first. What are the glaring things that you see going to different districts? And you don't have to use district names at all, but just like what are the big things that districts need help with the most?
Well, I just want to
ahead.
go back in terms of what our secret sauce is.
Mm-hmm.
Our secret sauce, I think, is Noreen and I, and the fact that we've we've led programs. We know it, and when we say we're boutique, we're boutique. We know we speak the lingo. We
Mm-hmm.
understand truly the position that the districts are in terms of special education. I think that's our secret sauce, Noreen.
I think that's it. I think then that's why some of these big companies come from other states.
Right.
They may be fabulous and much more sophisticated, maybe even than we are. There's probably old data teams that can crunch
Mhm.
data much better than either one of us can. But that said, they haven't walked the walk in New York State,
Mm-hmm.
so gives us a little advantage. But Mike, in terms of your question, I mean, to me, it's an easy one. I think the most blatant problem that we're seeing has to do with continuum of services. There's disregard might be too strong a word, but there's a lack of attention to ensuring that the entire continuum of services is used.
Mm-hmm.
And then what that does is it creates a problem with LRE. There's districts that just say, we don't do resource room anymore. We just don't. And
You need it.
that
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
need it.
it doesn't make sense, which means that there are kids that they're not in the least restrictive environment right
Right.
there. Or there's districts that have a preponderance of special classes
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they're dumping grounds. And that means that children are not getting LRE. So I would say to me, that's the what's glaring. And it's popped out in every district we've been in so far.
Right.
And
I would
the
say,
other
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Patrice.
the other thing in terms of LRE is we don't see, I mean, some places do with a development of creative special class programs.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I got the feeling from some of the school districts that we worked in that, well, we can't accommodate this child, getting back to that LRE, and they're out of district, and why aren't you creating programs for certain disabilities? Because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
I think people don't realize that special education is a finite resource, right? You only have so many staff, so many aides and speech. And what I've seen, the biggest problem I've seen in my 22-year career is when you get to that special class, right? The lower on the continuum, Very often you have a child who needs a special class educational system, but then with that you get the child who has high behavior. So where the child that needs the high touch for math is in the same class with a child that needs the high touch for behavior, and who's getting the most attention is behavior. So the math doesn't get done when behavior's there, and that just to me has been probably the biggest issue I've bumped up against in my whole career is when you're dealing with the special class kids. I've seen a big change in that. I've seen, especially with the increase in, staffing, sometimes you have to increase staff. And that's also a hard part too, because you only
Yeah.
have so much money.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
it's not a perfect system, and we're not magicians, but the regulations around continuous services, similarity of need, they're there for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And when done well and properly, that's what gives the advantage and makes the system work. So a lot of times that's just people have to be reminded of that. And that's why when we'll go in and we'll do class profiles for all the special classes, you see it black and white.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, take a look at this. You could see the disparity.
Right.
Um, and so that's a big thing. And then the second biggest glaring issue I think that pops is professional development and training. We're very often very scattered and, again, hard to do because it takes time to organize it, takes resources. It's hard to get substitutes, all of that. So the professional development, which would then make people aware of things like continuum of services, LRE, reading programs. So I think PD, that pops up often. And then most recently, meaning the most recently, we've seen problem of people being able to get staffing, get like
Yeah.
aides and paraprofessionals. They just can't find them.
Well, I think I know why. These are the people in the deepest of trenches getting paid the
Mhm.
least.
Yes.
That's the toughest part. I think that actually goes back to when I worked at the private school. I was in, a class, there was a lead teacher and 4 teachers with 10 kids. And then they try to recreate that in a district, and you have a lead teacher and 4 aides and 10 kids. It's not the same thing at all. And, I actually, have in the past run, little focus groups with aides. And, these are the adults that are being kicked, bit, expected to collect data, expected to, and the training isn't there for them and the pay and all that stuff. So it is a tough position to be in. But a lot of people that I know that do it because they love the kids, and that love keeps them there. But love only goes so far sometimes.
Yeah. It is vocational. I'll share a little personal story. I have a brother, an older brother, who was a professional chef and retired from his job as a professional chef and responded to an ad for a culinary skills class to teach culinary skills. He moved down to Delaware and he didn't get hired for that. I think probably they wanted someone that could be there longer. He was a little older. But they said, would you consider being a teaching assistant? So he said, oh, okay. So he became a teaching assistant in a life skills class that went to this culinary skills as part of their day. As time passed, they realized what they had, but I have never seen a more natural, gifted educator in my life as my older brother. There was just something about him. And I say, well, it's your vocation. It's like you joining the priesthood or something. I don't know. You were just
Yeah.
called to it. And he's so good and he's so natural. And even when there's real difficult circumstances, he'll call me and ask my opinion on how to manage things. And his intuition is incredible. So we don't need necessarily educational experts in
Mhm.
these jobs. We need people with good intuition that care about kids and then that are provided training, safety, all of that. So we definitely have to do something about that because they're very, very necessary and important.
Yeah, I had my TA, Margie Gilbert, still one of my best friends in the entire world. She was the TA in my class. I think we have a 20-year gap in age, but I tried to get her to go back to school so many times to get her degree in education. She never did, but she, to this day, is one of the best teachers I've ever met in my entire life. Just intuitive, smart, always do the right thing to do, someone you could always rely on. And, she's a TA still. But she loves it and she does it for the love. So, kudos to her. I always say that because she was my favorite person in the entire world, is my favorite person in the entire world. But so, once you've done your whole workup in these districts, how many districts, take what you say and run with it? Or are they like, thanks for this paperwork, great job, I'll put this, on my stack of things I have to do next week? Or
Well, Patrice, I don't think anybody, just files it. I think in varying degrees, two of the districts we've gone back and mentored people that assumed new roles. We have gone and done, one district had us come and do a temperature, not temperature check, a checkup. What was that, about 6 months after or maybe longer, a year after we were gone.
How they progressed
They
on
said,
their
how did we do with implementing the changes? Which made us feel really good.
That's great.
And they did very well, by the way. They did very well. Another district asked us if we would mentor their new administrator. So this follow-up to our work, which is, I think that's indicative of maybe their satisfaction, and also they realize that it has to be ongoing. It can't be a one-shot deal where they take the folder and put it on the shelf.
That's amazing. It's funny. I've been through, I don't know how many different, I don't know what you would even call them. I know we had mood meters for a while. Then we did all sorts of different kind of spearheaded new things that were, this is where we're going in special education or as a district. And they were there for a bit and then they were gone. I think there's probably closets full of old reading programs that we used in the past. So, I'm sure you could probably make some money back and sell those to other districts. But that's great that you,
oh,
you
hold
know,
on to them. They'll come back. Hold on to
yeah,
them. They'll
right.
come back.
I think Spire is the new one. Which was OG, which was Wilson, which is all the same thing over and over again. But I love the fact that, it could be, the mentorship part seems like I've never heard of that in a consulting firm where, they ask back to come and mentor their administrators. I think that just shows a lot of how the districts view you as a two-person company, right? And that they have you come back to keep spreading your knowledge, which I think is amazing. That obviously speaks volumes for, how you interact with the staff. Is anyone like, are people scared when you come into the classroom?
Maybe. I don't think so.
I mean, just naturally they would be like, who are these people?
Hmm.
Are they from the state?
Right.
Who are they? But I think Noreen and I make them feel at ease, and, we're always very complimentary, and, oh, thank you so much. And, it's, yeah, I mean,
Mike,
I,
there was one district where there were the two administrators we worked very closely with. They called us with all kinds of problems for about a year. But we weren't on the payroll, by the way. We just would talk. Sometimes Patrice and I would be together and we would talk together. Or sometimes Patrice would just call me and say, I've got so-and-so on the line. And then the two of us would give our opinions and try to help them out. We built up trust, and we're pretty down to earth, and
yeah.
helped.
And, one thing about this profession, and I think they'll all learn, is that sometimes you need to pick up the phone and talk to somebody who understands, to
Right.
talk it through. And, they call us to talk it through. I mean, I used to do that all the time at Maureen. It would be 6 o'clock at night, and who's at their desk but a special ed person. And I could call Noreen or some other of my colleagues, and it was just talking through the problem. What sometimes our problems didn't have the best solution, but we found the best solution. Might not have been the right, but the best one we could get.
That's great. So, to wrap all of this up, what advice would you give to the educational leader looking to transition into a role of consultant? What have you learned in your few years of being this new agency? What kind of advice would you give to that person?
Find a good partner, number one. If you're going to do it, find a good
Sweet.
yeah, yes, find a good partner. I don't what
I think, just figure out what it is you want to do. What services do you want to offer? And how ready you are to offer those services. And we were pretty narrow. We said professional development, auditing. We had put in initially, we would help design, mental health programs, because I did a lot of that in Rockville Center, although we have done, I would say, very, very little to none of that.
Hmm.
Um, help with staffing,
Mhm.
So we picked 4 or 5 things. The audit, the reviews of what's caught on.
Mhm.
Although we've done a fair amount of professional development as well in several districts and in BOCES.
Absolutely.
So, we're open with the other piece that we've been helpful, not that this is anything that we charge for, is because we're so connected with people that recently retired, we're helping people find interims.
Hmm.
We're like matchmakers.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Right.
So some of our friends don't answer our calls anymore. Others very happy for the work,
Yeah.
but we're able to put it in. I think bottom line, Mike, what I'd advise is you have to make sure you're going in with the same amount of intellectual curiosity, energy, and interest in helping our most vulnerable kids as you had when you were on the job in the district. Maybe more because you're going to be landing on several different planets within a year. It takes intellectual interest, energy, and enthusiasm. You never lose enthusiasm, right?
Well, it's funny. Speaking of interims, I'm actually interviewing Debbie Kinky in a few weeks, and she's back, I think, in Limbrook. So she's never retired. I mean, she's been an interim for so long.
Yeah. It's funny because I saw her 2 weeks ago and she's like, "Oh, I heard you meeting with my buddy. I'm meeting with him too."
Yep.
So,
Yep.
and
Oh
that was
my
the other thing behind these relationships, so that I'm really good friends with the people that I worked with in special ed roles. I sometimes see people I worked with, but I'm more in contact with my special ed friends than I am with my district friends.
Yep. Yes, I love
That's
Deb.
true. And the lawyers we worked with, we're both still friends with our lawyers, so
Well, that's good.
that's a good too.
It's good to have on your side for sure.
And Mike, I wanna thank you and others like you that have, the ingenuity to develop programs that help the field as well. I think your creation of Datability was really genius, and, I hope it continues to thrive because we really do need good, bad, or ugly, progress monitoring is here to stay, and a very, very necessary part of what we do.
Hmm. It's been the hardest thing to get people to do. I mean, like, if I wasn't trained on it when I worked, my graduate schooling was with the woman that was the head of Ascent. And so we spent so much time collecting data that I can't see not collecting data. But my
Mhm.
aunt, who was a special ed teacher for many, many years, and she's the reason why I became one, she didn't, this back, you didn't have to. So, she was like, what is this? What do you collect the data for? I'm like, wow, you have to. It's because you have to. But I appreciate that. And I, from your mouth to God's ears, I still, even to this day, even in Oceanside, not everyone will use it. And I'll be talking to a friend and they're making their own Google sheets. I'm like, why are you making your own Google sheet? We have this in district. And they're like, oh, I already have my own template. I'm like, all right, whatever, you do what you want. But when you don't want to make Google sheets anymore, you can come over and use the program that we pay for.
That's right.
So, where can people get in touch with you if they want to hire you and get your knowledge and have you come in to talk to them? Where can they find you?
Well, our website is northstareducators.com, and, our email is northstareducators@gmail.com. And that's the best way is probably to email. If you wanna take a look at the website and see what our services are, it's a good place to start. But just send us an email, and,
Sounds
we'd
good.
be we'd be happy to help if we can.
Well,
Absolutely.
listen, it was a real pleasure to speak to you guys today. I'm glad we got a chance to do this, and I wish you nothing but success in the future. Both of you are in it for the right reasons. You have the energy to do it, and I'm impressed. I think it's a great move for you, and one day, hopefully, I'll work for you. I don't know if you need a retired special ed teacher. I'm game. I love it.
Perfect. We would look
Hey,
forward to that.
Thanks.
yes, we do. All right.
Well, thank you very much, Patrice and Noreen. It's again been a pleasure, and I hope you guys have a great weekend.
You
You
too.
too.
Enjoy. Take care.
Okay.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.